How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Nice to officially meet you.
Nice to
Heard
meet you
some
too.
great things. Joseph spoke very highly, said you had a pretty amazing story.
How do you enjoy knowing one another?
We actually got connected through a local networking group here called Synergize that we went to, and all for giving back and making a difference in the community. And every time we get together in a group, we're always donating, you know, thousands of dollars to local charities and organizations. It's a group of business owners that conglomerate, and it's all for a charity and a good cause. And when you bring that many great-hearted people together that all want to make a difference, you can make an even bigger difference. So it's been a pretty powerful group locally to be a part of.
That's great. You originally from that area?
Yeah, I'm from actually Michigan originally, near Detroit, called Waterford, and then moved
Livonia?
here. What was that?
Livonia? No, I
Near
have.
that, a little bit, yep. Just probably 35 minutes away from that area, so not too far. But I've been living in Indianapolis since 2007.
Okay.
Yeah, what about you? Are you in Indy or living somewhere else now, or?
I'm in New York City. Actually, I'm
Nice.
on Long Island right now. That's where I live, and I have one of my offices on Long Island, but my primary practice is in New York City. So I'm born and raised here, and lived here all my life. But I spend most of my time traveling around the world right now,
Huh.
except for COVID right now. But other than
Right.
that, I'm usually about 6 months of the year, somewhere lecturing, teaching, treating, examining, training other health professionals somewhere around the world how to
Wow.
do what they do.
That is absolutely incredible to be able to have learned a really awesome way to help others, and then now you're replicating that, all throughout the world.
Yeah, well, we have over 100 centers here in the United States called brain balance centers. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
We've worked with over 50,000 kids in the last 12 years. But now, I've created an advanced model called the Milillo method, which is really a more clinical. The brain balance are really learning centers. They're not
Mhm.
healthcare facilities. But
Yep.
now this is, more an advanced healthcare model, which is what I, train doctors in. And we also are developing centers around the world. So as soon as the world opens back up, we had plans to do one in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I have something going on in Bulgaria right now, and we're in discussions for Malaysia and China. And so,
Oh my goodness. World impactor on a deep level.
I'm gonna do it. That's it. That's, to me, my main focus and goal is just, before I leave, to try to make the biggest impact I can. That's it, and to do it in a positive way. And a lot of my my ideas, my theories, my concepts are very innovative, but also very different from traditional medicine, psychology, education. So of course I've met with a lot of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But I've done a lot of research and we've proven it. And now recently there was a independent study at Harvard Medical School that basically proved everything I've ever said.
Wow.
So
That's awesome. When you can see things come out like that you're like, boom, proof's in the pudding, right?
exactly.
So what led up to where you are today? Tell us a little bit maybe about your, you know, I think I remember Joe mentioning you have a child with special needs. Is that correct?
All three of my kids had different issues, but really it all started with me. I've been a clinician for over 30 years. And my focus from the very beginning, I became specialized in two specialties, which was really rehabilitation and neurology. And trying to figure out how to combine those two together. And I was an athlete when I was younger, so using kind of like a sports medicine approach to neurological type of conditions. And so, I started doing some pretty advanced stuff early on in my career, working mostly with teenagers and adults, and doing high levels of rehab and also starting to do research and teaching. But then around 1995, my wife introduced me to a woman who had a son with severe ADHD and mild autism, and she had done everything, and she had been tried all the traditional approaches. Now, in my office, I had started one of the first offices in the country that was fully multi-specialty, which means that I had, I started out as a chiropractor, but I also had a degree in neurology and rehabilitation, but I had MDs and PTs and OTs and psychologists and nutritionists and massage therapists and acupuncturists and Chinese medicine, all in my practice.
Wow, amazing.
So, and I knew a lot about all of it because I knew a lot about nutrition and diet, and it was all part of the things that I had studied. And so I came home, and my wife had this woman sitting at our table crying, and my wife said, "Listen, I met Denise. She's really frustrated. She doesn't know what she do. She's looking for other different things she can do." And I told her, I'd already been teaching neurology and clinical neurology. I knew a lot about the brain. And she said, maybe you could help her. Now, I didn't work with a lot of kids at the time, and I didn't know what ADHD really was. But I had seen more and more of my patients asking about it with their kids. Mm-hmm. And so I said to my wife, well, I'm pretty busy as it is. You really want me to do this? And she said, I get a feeling like you're supposed to do this for some reason. I don't know why, but this is something that I think that you're supposed to do. And I said, okay. So then about 2 days later, we go to my oldest son's first grade parent teacher meeting. First one I ever went to, really. And the teacher says, I think your son has ADHD or something like that. So now, one, I feel embarrassed as a professional who's supposed to know something about neurology and the brain, and I don't know what ADHD is. I obviously didn't see it in my own son. Mm-hmm. And I feel also like most parents do, like I'm to blame some way because I'm not around. I'm lecturing on weekends and I'm busy. But then I heard my wife saying, you're supposed to do something with this. And I do believe in signs like that. So
absolutely.
So it all started me with one question, which was, what is it? What is actually happening in the brain? What is ADHD? And what is autism? And what is dyslexia? And what is learning disabilities and processing? And why do they come together so often, right? That was the first question for me. Mm-hmm. And I went out and I asked, all these different doctors that I knew and I worked with. I had neurologists in my practice and pediatricians that I knew and psychologists, and everybody said they didn't know. They had no idea what it was. And I was kind of shocked, to be honest with you. And then there was a statistic in 1995 that came out that the use of Ritalin had increased from 250% from 90 to 95, and no one knew why. So now we're looking at this literal epidemic rise of these issues. And you're telling me that most professionals have no idea what is actually happening. And to me, that's where it had to start. If I could help my child or this other woman's child, mm-hmm. I needed to know what it was, right? And I had this rehab mentality, like, show me the problem and I'll figure out how to fix it. So I decided to, do the research myself. And then after about 10 years, I published a number of papers and eventually put together a textbook of Neurobehavioral Disorders of Childhood and Evolutionary Perspective, where I not only knew what the problem was, but I also had come up with a unique solution for the problem that didn't just manage it, but corrected it. And understanding that the main problem, the reason why things were so comorbid was there's one underlying problem that manifests in different ways and can produce different symptoms and combinations of symptoms, but it's still the same problem. And the problem is known as a functional disconnection syndrome. And essentially, this is a developmental imbalance between networks on either side of the brain that interferes with normal, what we call functional connectivity and communication and coordination of networks. Mm-hmm. And what happens is we have certain areas on one side become overactive and grow basically too quickly, where other areas are underactive, underdeveloped, and underconnected and immature. Mm-hmm. And this imbalance, and there's a different makeup of which areas and which networks, this is what produces the symptoms. So we have overactive areas on one side of the brain that produce symptoms.
Yeah.
Then we have underactive areas on one side that produces symptoms, and they come together to produce the almost all neurobehavioral disorders and mental health disorders that we know of. So for instance, if we look at ADHD, we have overactivity of the left brain will produce things like physical hyperactivity, tics, stims, vocal tics. It will produce OCD, obsessive, compulsive, impulsive behavior. Excuse me. Hi, I'm in the middle of an interview, so just you can stay if you want. Just I'm in the middle of doing something, and so this produces overactive symptoms. And then the underdevelopment of the ventral anterior network on the right side affects sustained attention. So we have a deficit of attention on the right side with overactivity of various networks on the left. And together that is ADHD, right? Attention deficit hyperactive disorder.
Yeah.
And this is true for OCD, tics, Tourette's, schizophrenia, even drug addiction, anxiety. And then the other side is where we see a deficit on the left and overactive right. This is what we see with dyslexia, most learning disorders, processing disorders, and even things like bipolar, PTSD, and depression. And because it's the brain, it doesn't just produce mental health or educational symptoms, it also produces physical symptoms.
Yeah.
And so in all of these issues, we see different varying forms of chronic digestive problems, chronic bowel issues, or eczema, asthma, allergies, chronic infections, yeast infections, hormone imbalances, detoxification problems, sugar regulation problems, leaky gut, leaky brain. All of that is secondary to the brain. So therefore, the solution is not just doing diet and nutrition or doing elimination diets or medication or psychotherapy. The solution is really doing those things, but in combination with directed brain stimulation that is targeting the underactive and underdeveloped areas on one side of the brain, which promotes growth in those areas, dampens the overactivity in the other, and then promotes integration of the two hemispheres. And this is exactly what Harvard showed happened. And the way to promote, we have to understand the brain builds from the bottom up. And so what starts the whole process is something known as retained primitive reflexes. And so these reflexes that we're born with that help us with rooting and sucking and initially moving our body when we don't have a motor cortex yet, we have these reflexes that allow us to move, and eventually the baby even helps them birth themselves. And, we've known about primitive reflexes for over 100 years, and we still know them because many of them return with brain injury or degeneration. Things like a Babinski sign is something that is really a primitive reflex that we see normally in the first year of life. It's part of a normal maturational process as the brain matures and as it builds from the bottom up and then comes from the top down to regulate things. It also comes down and shuts off all of these reflexes. But if these reflexes don't go away in the first year, which now we kind of realize that maybe in 50% of the population or more, they don't go away.
Right.
They will act as a blockage towards development and will cause an imbalance in development. And if they don't go away in the first year on their own, they never go away.
Wow.
So I see people 50, 60 years old that still have all of these primitive reflexes that are having an impact on them. And then this is superimposed on normal traits, meaning that we all have either a normal right brain or left brain dominance. And in people that, are really gifted or talented in certain areas or certain networks, it just means those areas are more connected. And so now if you take an area that is naturally more connected, and now because of this imbalance, it grows even more. Now you have this excessive trait So many of these kids, one of the things I first saw was what we call this unevenness of skills, where they're not deficient or delayed in everything. They may be advanced or exceptional or even genius level with certain skills, but then they're very deficient on the other. And the more skilled they are on one side, the more deficient, as in like autism, when you look at, the savant syndrome is the perfect example, the Rain Man type of situation, right? Which is the extreme version of that.
Yeah.
And so that basically is the whole story. And the idea was to be able to say, okay, we need to, develop a program that integrates all different types of therapies. And I researched every therapy that basically had ever been done, and tried to figure out, now understanding what the problem was, how can you use this to really change it?
Yeah.
And that is what I developed into my program that initially was the Brain Balance program, which I wrote about in my book, Disconnected Kids, and then was the basis of the Brain Balance Centers. And then clinically, as a doctor, always looking for cutting edge treatments and different things and more advanced. That's where I am now in my own practice and when I train other doctors. And now we have tools like lasers and transcranial direct current and alternating current and magnetic current and TENS stimulation and neurofeedback and QEEG and all of these different tools that we can use. And they're great tools, but as I train doctors, that the tools are great, but if you don't know what you're doing with it, if you don't use it in exactly the right way and at the right time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. That's so true. Timing.
If you bring in some of these advanced tools too early, it doesn't work, So there are various stages. For me, when anybody, at any age, if they have primitive reflexes, we have to get rid of those. And right now I'm doing a PhD project really studying primitive reflexes with some of the top neuropsychologists and neurologists in the world to really understand this and to really prove that these exist and that this affects functional connectivity using QEEG and that we can eliminate them and it changes it. So we're doing it in autism right now. And over the next few years, we'll publish some really, really advanced papers on this area and really prove that this is exactly what's happening, as Harvard already did, really.
Yeah. Wow. I am blown away. You make perfect sense. I mean, ideally, my son is going to be 9. He's severely autistic, nonverbal, epileptic, and it's every part of life has been a journey, right? You learn, you adapt, you adjust, you want your kids to thrive and do well, and you implement different things to kind of help them along the way. And I mean, for us, it was like immediately when he started having seizures at 18 months, I was like, gluten-free, dairy-free. We got to heal that gut. We got to work on his gut, fresh smoothies and trying to keep him healthy on a gut standpoint. But his stool was just always soft, never solid. And it's always been an issue. He's very, very sensory fixated. So he has to have something in his hands, constantly moving it, squishing something, constantly manipulating something in his hands all the time, or he won't. Like it's just a constant itch for him, like having something in his hands. So putty and sand and kinetic sand and morph and
retained palmar reflex, by the way. Yes, he has retained palmar reflex. And then you're describing the hyperactivity in the left side in the sensory motor cortex and right brain. Autism is a most severe right brain deficit with overactive left brain. And that's where the tics and the hyperactivity and the stims and come from. And even though the left brain is verbal, the problem isn't really a verbal one. Usually their brain actually in their verbal area is better than yours and mine. But it's the nonverbal drive to speak, the context of speak that should develop first as the foundation of speech that doesn't develop. And then the other problem in nonverbal autism is that they can't control their muscles to speak. So, it's more of a challenge. That's really what my focus, especially over the past 5 years around the world, has been, the most severe nonverbal autistic kids. And obviously my PhD project is on autism. Yeah. So, but, we're getting kids to speak within 6 to 8 months, almost.
Wow. That's amazing.
and minimum, I mean, maximum of 6 to 8 months. And that's almost 100%. I mean, as long as they don't have a brain injury or a true genetic disorder.
Yeah.
Which,
And that was another question I was going to run into with you, just out of curiosity, because brain injury, traumatic birth, can lead to obviously having brain deposition, which can cause your ability to not be able to function. And obviously neurofeedback, I feel like, is very beneficial to help recreate those pathways, or potentially create pathways that weren't able to be used in the past for that type of ability to communicate. So I mean, our son had mercury lead poisoning. We did the low dose chelation through Dr. Andrew Cutler to kind of remove that. We did some stem cell therapy using umbilical cord tissue. We've seen some impact with that. We're working with holistic nutrition and food sensitivity testing, and we just removed a ton of stuff from his diet. And he went from having 11 seizures in November to only 1 in December, 1 in January. And finally, he's now over 2 months with no seizures, which is the longest he's gone in over 2 years. So we're seeing, like, it's, as you mentioned, instrumental things and timing, the right timing to do things. And now I'm like, maybe this neurofeedback thing is like the next thing, because we did it a couple of years ago, but for him, it wasn't ready for it. But I think maybe
even now, I'm going to tell you, because I do neurofeedback, and it's a great tool at the right time, but it's a late stage tool. It's not an early stage tool, because it's a top-down therapy. And if there are bottom-up problems, like if there are retained reflexes, if there are motor and sensory issues, if there are vestibular imbalances and oculomotor imbalances, you need to get rid of those issues and build them up first, and build the brain, because what we say is that this bottom-up interference, the brain and the frontal lobe isn't built yet. And neurofeedback, the brain can only learn even operantly when it's capable of learning, right? So neurofeedback is a very high level top-down therapy. It's like psychotherapy. It's like education. It's like trying to teach a kid with dyslexia how to read by reading. It doesn't work that way, right? So, but diet and nutrition is helpful, and that will obviously overall. Now, again, the concept of brain injury, first of all, one of the things about kids with autism is they don't have brain injury. It's not an injury. It's an imbalance. And if you look at their brain, you see that their brains look perfectly normal. That's why it's so mysterious. That's why most people have no idea what it is, because when you look at the brain, it looks fine. Chemically, it's fine. There's no genetic mutation. There is this developmental imbalance. That is the root cause. So therefore, it isn't an injury. And there are kids that do have brain injuries, but they don't have unevenness of skills. They don't have hyperactive areas and underactive. They have everything that is deficient. And that's what you see in a brain injury. That's what you see in like an oxygen deprivation or a birth injury, or if you see it in a true genetic disorder like Down syndrome or Fragile X, you see global deficits. You don't see unevennesses. And that's how you know that the problem is in the brain. And even though there are dietary issues and nutritional issues, and if you deal with them, it definitely will help, you're not dealing with the core issue. And the core issue is there. And if you use top-down approaches like neurofeedback or, even behavioral interventions, although, the behavioral interventions might help you manage it, you're not dealing with the core issue. And the goal is not to just manage it, but to try to fix it.
Right.
And, most people will tell you that that's impossible, but I've done it thousands and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of times. So it's not impossible. Right. Some kids will never be, normal, typical, but they certainly can get a lot better. But many of the kids, probably 30 to 50%, will be almost completely normalized.
Wow, that's amazing. So what type of program do you recommend for somebody that needs to work on their primitive reflex, ability and strengthen that? My
program, it's called the Milillo method. That's the program. And I have doctors that I've trained all over. There is a doctor in Indianapolis, a Dr. Brad Ralston, who is trained in my work. He's not fully certified, There might be some other people certified if you actually look on my website. But, you know, also in an ideal world, if you can come and bring your son to see me, you know, that would be the best, because this way, you know, I could examine him myself. But in the interim, I do have doctors that I've trained all over the world that are certified in the Milillo method, that have a fellowship, or doctors that have taken my course that may not be fully certified, but have taken my course and do know a lot about it. We have brain balance centers down there, but your son is not a brain balance candidate. He's a little young and they don't work with nonverbal, but Brad has his own practice down there. So, you know, that might be where you may want to try to start.
Okay, cool. Yeah, awesome. That's great feedback. I didn't intentionally want to dig into that information, but it's cool the conversation kind of led in that way, because that's kind of where we're at, you know, with where he is, which is awesome. Do you find that, one question I had is, what can cause the overreactive and underreactive parts of the brain to develop?
My third book is all about this, by the way. My third book is called Autism, the Scientific Truth, Diagnosing, Treating, and Preventing Autism Spectrum Disorder. And it's all about what causes this. And, you know, it is essentially what we call epigenetic, not genetic for the most part. There, you know, and it's not just about autism, it's about all of it. I'm sorry, there are other people coming into the office, so it might get a little loud here for a second.
No worries. Yep.
But yeah, so it's epigenetic, mostly environmental, superimposed on normal family traits that are excessive. And it's a combination of those things that come together that produce these imbalances, along with these retained primitive reflexes. And what I did was I was able to identify in the book really about 50 really well documented environmental factors and lifestyle factors, all of which increase your risk of having a child with a disability, you know, a certain percentage. And so the more that you have, the more likely you are to have a child that might have some form of disability. And it's not just the mother, it's the mother and the father. And most of these issues are there preconception. And there are different things that impact gene expression. And especially 85% of the genes that we have are there to build functional connectivity in the brain. So those are the most susceptible to the environment, because our brain grows throughout our life. It's the only organ that does, and it grows mostly outside of the womb. And so therefore it's very sensitive to the environment, which is what stimulates the growth. But it also means that it's very susceptible to any negative environmental influences, or if those positive environmental influences aren't there at the right time. And so that combination of things, and the fact that the right brain develops first in the womb and for the first 2 to 3 years, and then the left brain kicks in for the next 3 years. And so during those periods, there again is a susceptibility where if one side slows down during development, the other one speeds up, or if one comes online too soon, or if one side comes online too late, or if the left brain comes online first. All of those things are things that can influence the way the brain develops and can lead to these imbalances.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. I thought the brain grew together the same way, right and left.
It grows, physically it grows, but if you look at the research, it shows that the right brain is a little bit more electrically active during the first 3 years, which is the reason why we develop a right brain and a left brain that do different things, is because as they're developing, these stimulations and experiences that are happening shape that side of the brain. And in the first 6 years, the foundation of what the right brain will do and what the left brain will do better, all areas of the brain are pretty much the same. Yeah. And there's a little bit of a genetic difference that creates right and left brain, but the vast majority of the difference is created by non-genetic factors and by experience. And so this is very important, because having two different areas of our brain that can integrate, it's like having two brains in one. Yeah. You think about it, Why would you have two areas of the brain that do the exact same thing? It doesn't make sense, right? It's redundant, and it actually reduces efficiency. So when people talk about areas like, well, the amygdala does this, well, the left amygdala does one thing and the right amygdala does. Now they're both active all the time, but they do different things. And that makes a lot more sense. And when you look at the symptoms of things like ADHD or OCD or schizophrenia or bipolar, when you look at them for their face, they don't make sense. It's like, why? Like you talk about your son. Why does he have a gluten and dairy sensitivity? Why? Why does your son have that? And why does he have all the other things that he has, right? Why? What's the reason for it? It doesn't make sense if you just look at it. But if you look at it in the context of right and left brain, all of a sudden you go, wow, okay, now this makes perfect sense. And that's the thing. That's my contribution is to be able to look at that. And other people have said that as well. There's a guy named Ian McGilchrist, who's a really well-known psychiatrist out of the UK. And he wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Rise of Western Civilization. And it's an 800-page book with thousands of references that have very similar references as my textbook. And he talks about how all of the psychological and psychiatric issues can be described through brain asymmetry and through looking at brain. Now, he doesn't have a solution for it. He recognized it as a problem, but he doesn't know how to fix it. The difference is I came up with a solution for it.
That's awesome. I love it. So our magazine goes out right now to 600 families in Indianapolis and surrounding counties that have signed up that want to receive it, that have kids with special needs. We also mail to ABA centers, developmental pediatrician offices, and also nonprofits that support the special needs community. We have a digital distribution as well, since it's super interactive. So after our call, I'll share with you a link that you can click on and view all of our past digital copies, just in case you want to use it or share it or check it out or read some of the cool stories, because obviously we'll be featuring you in one of the issues as well. So, and I bring that all up just to kind of give you some context of like who we mail out to. You know, right now I got connected to a local school district that she oversees all of the special education program in their district, and she's connecting me with every single school district in the whole state of Indiana to be able to share our digital version with all of their families that have kids with special needs, which is absolutely incredible, the impact that this potential magazine can have, because it's families, it's individuals that are sharing their stories that, and my purpose behind doing it is you feel alone, you feel isolated, you feel overwhelmed. And as a parent of a child with special needs, you don't know where to turn or where to go. And I wanted to create something that helped give families hope, inspiration, and encouragement, but also something that gave resources to families that helped them find things that they didn't know existed, to help them and their individual or their child live their best life or experience things they wouldn't have experienced if they didn't even know about it any other way. And I mean, just through doing the magazine alone, I found out about holistic nutrition, that they've been able to do food sensitivity and help our son with seizures, and you know, the stem cell therapy, and just obviously our conversation could lead in a whole nother direction of impact there with the Milillo method, which I'm excited to dive into and learn more about. And so that's really kind of the context of this particular magazine. All families, all backgrounds, all walks of life, all demographics, but designed for impact and support and help and resources. And I bring all of that up just to share, like, if you had things, I guess advice or something that you want to share specifically, whether maybe it's two different questions for families in general that have children with special needs, something for them that you want to share with them, and then maybe even for individuals, because we go to a lot of nonprofits and ABA centers and you know, companies that offer speech and developmental and different therapies in general for children with special needs. Anything you would like to share with the caregivers and those in healthcare that support individuals with special needs?
Yeah, just that you know, most people are told that there's not much they can do for these issues long term, that these are lifelong problems that they can only learn to just manage. That's not true. That when you understand really what's happening, in the vast majority of these issues, they can be completely corrected, and that they happen typically in kids that are really gifted And so that's really who that child is supposed to be, or the adult. And if these issues don't go, if you don't deal with them in childhood, they will continue on to adulthood, but it's never too early and it's never too late to change it or completely reverse it. There are some instances where, if there's true genetic issues or true brain injury where there may be some limitations. In some cases of nonverbal autism, there may be some limitations, but other than that, ADHD, dyslexia, learning, they can be completely corrected, and the parent should not ever compromise that vision and that goal. And if you find someone that says it's not possible, they're wrong. Find somebody else that knows my work. And again, we have more cases than just about any organization in the country with working with, my centers and my practice. For caregivers, again, I believe that this is absolutely the most cutting edge model that exists today. And my course is completely online. We are getting people from all over the world every day looking for people that are certified in my method to do this. And my book has been translated into 13 and now 14 languages, I think. So I have people all over the world that are doing this. And so I think that, they should take my course, which is 10 modules. They can do it online. We'll be doing it live again, probably in June in Dallas. We'll start it up because there's a lot of hands-on training to do it. But if they go to my website, drrobertmilillo.com, they'll be able to find that. Okay.
Well,
right. And I'm sorry, I do have to go because I have patients.
Absolutely. Well, I really enjoyed getting to know you better, and thanks for sharing your story. And feel free to send me some additional information if you'd like, and then I'll get this to my writer, and we'll get you back the story to review. And we look forward to sharing it in a future issue of Special Needs Living.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks,
I appreciate
Dr. Milillo.
it.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.